The church bells told their sound, rolling across the small frontier town like a summons pulling every soul to its doors. Inside, the pews overflowed, the air thick with murmurs and heat, and at the front stood the elder daughter, dressed in white. Her veil trembled with every breath, her gloved hands clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning from the edge of the creek. She stood straight, proud in form if not in heart, her chin high, though her eyes blurred behind the thin lace. The whispers ran through the crowd like wind through wheat. She finally caught him. At last, her family will rise. The younger sister must be burning with envy. The organ gave a wheezing sigh. The wooden doors opened, and in strode the cowboy, broad-shouldered, dust still clinging to his coat, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Every head turned, every whisper hushed. The bride's heart lifted. This was the moment she had endured the long wait for, the moment the veil would be lifted, and her worth made plain before them all. This was the moment everything changed. But he did not stop at the altar. His boots struck the boards, steady and unhurried, passing her where she stood, frozen in white. He didn't even glance her way. It was as if she were a ghost, a statue of salt already dissolving in the humid air. The crowd held its breath, a collective gasp caught in 1,000 throats. What was happening? This wasn't part of the ceremony. This wasn't right. Gasps erupted as he reached instead for the hand of her younger sister, seated shyly at the front pew, her dress plain, her eyes wide with a terror that looked far too real to be faked. He took her hand and she flinched, trying to pull away, but his grip was like iron. He drew her to her feet, pulling her out of the pew and into the aisle beside him. The whole church could see her trembling, could see the way she shook her head, her lips forming silent pleas. "I claim her," he said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence, "not the one forced upon me." The words hit the elder bride like a physical blow. Her breath caught, her bouquet slipping from her numb fingers, the wildflowers scattering across the floorboards like fallen soldiers. Her veil hid the tears already burning down her cheeks, but her trembling betrayed her. The carefully constructed pride she had worn like armor just moments before shattered into a million pieces. Murmurs erupted, sharp as knives. What is he doing? Has he gone mad? The shame of it, the absolute unbearable shame. Elias Red Feather. A veil is meant to shield a bride's blush. But that morning, it became a mask to hide her breaking soul. She staggered back, clutching at the lace, as if it could keep her from shattering, while the younger sister tried to pull away, shaking her head in fear. "No, please, not like this," she whispered, her voice a raw thread of sound in the rising storm. But the cowboy held her hand firm, his eyes fixed on the minister, who stood gaping, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. The minister stammered, his words lost beneath the rising tide of voices. At the altar, the elder sister swayed, the veil blurring her vision, her chest heaving as the world shifted beneath her feet. And when she finally found her voice, it broke into a sob, a raw, ragged sound that tore through the chaos. The whole town heard it, though the veil caught the tears that stained her lips unseen. The church erupted into utter chaos. Pews creaked as people surged to their feet, craning their necks, their faces a mixture of shock and cruel delight. Mothers pulled their children close, whispering warnings about disgrace, while men shook their heads with grim satisfaction at the scandal laid bare before them. The minister raised his hands helplessly, his Bible trembling in his grasp, but no words of order could tame the roar of voices that swelled inside those walls. The elder sister stood frozen at the altar, veil trembling with each ragged breath, her body stiff as a figure carved of salt. Her bouquet lay crushed under the heel of a careless guest, its petals scattered like confetti for a wedding that had already died. The younger sister tried to shrink back into the pew, but the cowboy's hand held her firm, his eyes unflinching, though the world around him seethed with judgment. "This is madness," someone cried from the back. "You mock God himself in his house." Another man spat on the floor. "A man who breaks a bride on her own day deserves the noose." The elder sister's lips parted, her sobs muffled beneath the veil, her tears soaking the lace until it clung to her skin like a second, colder skin. She longed to scream, to tear it away, but pride, that stubborn, foolish pride, kept her upright. Her face remained hidden, though her hands trembled so fiercely the lace quivered with them. Her mother rushed forward then, her face flushed crimson, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. "Explain yourself," she demanded of the cowboy, her eyes spitting fire. "This wedding was agreed, this day promised. You shame not only her, but us all." She stood between him and the altar, a furious sentinel guarding the ruins of her family's honor. Elias Red Feather, a family's honor is too often weighed in coin and promise, not in love. And when the scales tip, it is the daughter's back that breaks beneath the weight. The cowboy met the mother's fury with a calm defiance that was somehow more insulting than rage. "I will not bind myself in chains of deceit," he said, his voice ringing like a hammer against iron, echoing through the rafters. "I will not take a wife I cannot love." His words stirred the whispers into gasps. Deceit? What deceit? The crowd leaned forward, hungry for every syllable. The elder sister stumbled, clutching the veil against her face, as if it were all that kept her from dissolving beneath their eyes. The younger sister shook her head wildly, tears rising. "Please don't do this," she begged, her voice cracking. "Not before them all." But the crowd had already chosen its sides. Some jeered the younger girl, calling her a thief, a snake in her own sister's house. Others mocked the elder, their voices dripping with pity that was worse than scorn, saying no man wanted her at all. The church door burst open as more townsfolk pressed in, drawn by the scandal erupting from God's own house. Their laughter spilled into the square, carrying the humiliation into every ear of the town. And though her tears were hidden, the elder bride's shame burned hotter than fire, her veil the only shield left against a world that now mocked her openly. The church doors swung wide, and the scandal poured into the square like flood water, voices rising until the very rafters seemed to shake. The elder bride clung to the altar rail, her veil damp with tears, her body rigid as if sheer will alone kept her standing. Her sister trembled beside the cowboy, her hand caught in his, her lips moving soundlessly in protest. The crowd pressed close, their whispers sharp as daggers. "He's mad. She's cursed. The family will never recover." The father pushed forward then, his boots heavy against the boards, his face blotched with a terrible rage. He jabbed a thick finger at the cowboy, his voice cracking with fury. "This marriage was agreed," he roared, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. "You defy not only us, but every law that binds a man's word. Release her hand, or I'll see you ruined." He was a man used to getting his way, a man whose word was law in his own home, but he was not facing a timid farmhand. The cowboy did not flinch. He lifted his chin, his grip firm around the younger sister's trembling fingers. "I will not marry a woman forced upon me," he declared, his voice cutting through the father's rage. "I choose her, not the one bargained with, not the one paraded in lace. I choose the sister who holds my heart." The words struck the crowd like a stone into still water. Ripples of shock and outrage spread in every direction. The one bargained with. The phrase hung in the air, ugly and sharp. The elder sister's knees buckled, a strangled sound breaking from beneath her veil. She clutched at the rail, her nails scraping wood, the sound lost in the sudden, sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Her sob was muffled but sharp enough to silence even the boldest jeers for a single terrible heartbeat. Elias Redfeather. A man's declaration can be louder than gunfire, but it is the silence of a broken woman that echoes longest in memory. The younger sister shook her head desperately, tears streaking her cheeks. "Stop," she whispered hoarsely. "You'll ruin us all. This will break our family apart." She pulled against his hand, but it was like pulling against an oak tree. He would not be moved. But the cowboy only tightened his grip, his voice low yet resolute, meant only for her but overheard by the closest pews. Better broken by truth than bound by lies. The sheriff, who had been standing at the church door with the weight of the law pressed heavy on his shoulders, finally raised his hand for silence. "This isn't your decision alone, son," he said grimly, his voice carrying the weight of years of seeing frontier justice. "Such a scandal won't pass without blood. Think well before you bring a war to this square." But the die was already cast. The crowd roared again, some cursing the cowboy for a lawless rogue, others mocking the elder sister's veil, calling her unwanted, unchosen. The younger sister sobbed, torn between the shame of the moment and the undeniable strength of the hand that held hers. And as the elder bride sagged against the altar, her veil clinging to her wet cheeks, the truth blazed before them all. What was meant to be a union of honor had become a wound that would bleed through every name in that church for generations to come. The crowd spilled into the square, their voices boiling over as though the church itself could not contain the scandal. The elder sister stumbled from the altar, her veil trailing like a shroud, her sobs muffled behind the lace. She clutched at the door frame as the harsh sunlight struck her face, her eyes burning though hidden from view. Behind her, the cowboy led the younger sister through the chaos, his jaw set, his grip firm, while she tried to pull away, whispering, "Please, not like this, not before them all." But his stride was unbroken, his defiance a banner no veil could hide. Murmurs turned to shouts, some calling the younger sister a thief, others sneering that the elder had never been wanted at all. Stones clattered against the church steps, small rocks thrown by angry children, egged on by their parents. One child laughed as he stomped the bouquet of crushed wildflowers left behind, grinding the petals into the dirt. The elder sister froze at the top of the steps, swaying as the crowd surged around the church entrance. Then her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the boards, her veil sliding sideways, half covering her tear-streaked cheek. Her mother rushed to her, hands trembling as she tried to lift her, but the woman shook her head weakly, clutching the lace as if it were her only armor left. She couldn't face them. She couldn't bear their eyes on her face, seeing the ruin there. Elias Redfeather, a veil is meant to hide a bride's blush, but that day it hid the breaking of a soul too proud to shatter before her enemies. The crowd pressed closer, their jeers raining down like stones. "Look at her, the pretty dress wasted. Not even a man of dust would choose her." The sheriff tried to hold them back, his voice a low growl of authority, but their hunger for spectacle was louder than his badge. They smelled blood, and they wanted more. The younger sister twisted in the cowboy's grip, her face pale, her lips trembling as she cried, "Stop! Please, can't you see what this is doing to her?" But her words vanished in the storm of voices. The mob didn't care about her pain. They fed on it. The elder bride lifted trembling fingers to her face, tugging the veil down to cover the wet ruin of her cheeks. Her pride screamed not to let them see her tears, not to give them the satisfaction. But the lace clung to her skin, transparent in the harsh light, offering no real cover at all. And then, as a new surge of townsfolk pushed forward from the back, a hand shot out. A rough, calloused hand belonging to a rival farmer with a mean streak and an old grudge against her father. He grabbed the edge of the veil. The elder sister gasped, her hands flying up to protect it, to protect herself. But she was too slow. The veil was ripped from her head. It fluttered down the steps, a fragile white ghost in the afternoon sun. It was trampled beneath muddy boots, dragged through the dust until it was no longer white, but a filthy, torn gray. She reached for it, a choked cry escaping her throat, but her hand closed on empty air. The symbol of her honor, of her future, of her very identity as a woman in this town, lay ruined in the dirt, and the square roared with laughter, a cruel, ugly sound, as if her dignity had been torn away with it. And yet she rose, slowly, her body shaking, her face now bare and exposed to them all, hidden only behind her trembling hands. For though they had mocked her, she would not let them see her break completely. Not yet. The torn veil lay in the dust at the bottom of the church steps, crushed beneath boots and stained with mud. The elder sister stood above it, her face blotched with tears, her chest heaving as though each breath might tear her apart. The crowd jeered, savoring her ruin, while the cowboy stood with the younger sister at the far edge of the square, his grip unrelenting, though her body twisted with a shame that was not her own. She cried out suddenly, her voice slicing through the noise, raw and full of a fury that shocked the crowd into silence. "You've stolen my name, my place, my honor!" She stumbled down the steps, her fine wedding shoes slipping on the dirt, and snatched up the ruined veil. She clutched it like a weapon, though it dangled in tatters from her fists. The mob hushed, hungry for her rage, their faces lit with cruel delight, as if they'd been given a new scene to feast upon. She turned on them all, her voice raw, the tattered veil shaking in her grasp. "You laugh because you think me unwanted," she screamed, her eyes sweeping over their faces. "But it was never about love. It was a bargain, a trade, a wedding built on dowry, not desire." The words struck like lightning, silencing even the boldest jeers. Her father's face darkened, fury burning through the cracks of his pride. "Hold your tongue," he barked, his voice hard as iron. "You dishonor us further with your lies." He took a step toward her, his hand raised as if to strike the words from her mouth. The younger sister broke then, her body shaking with sobs, her face pale as parchment. "It's true," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear enough to be heard in the sudden, tense quiet. "She speaks truth. She never wanted this. I never wanted this. It was all arrangement and pride, and none of it mine to choose." Gasps rose from the crowd, some in shock, others in satisfaction at the scandal unfolding, like a wound no one could look away from. The family was eating itself alive, right here in the town square. Elias Red Feather. Truth spoken in fury is sharper than any blade, for it cuts bonds that might have been mended and leaves scars that cannot be hidden. The father's hand rose, his palm trembling with rage, as he turned toward the younger sister. He had been defied by one daughter, but to be betrayed by both was more than his pride could bear. "Ungrateful child," he snarled, his face a mask of fury. "You will not shame me before this town." His arm swung back, the crowd holding its breath, the slap coming as surely as thunder after lightning. But before the blow could fall, the cowboy stepped between them. His movement was a blur, faster than anyone thought possible. His hand shot out, gripping the father's wrist mid-swing, stopping it inches from the girl's face. His voice came low, steady, but filled with an iron that promised violence. "No man raises a hand to her while I draw breath." The square erupted again, some with outrage at the cowboy's audacity, some with shock at the father's open brutality, and some with a heavy silence that was more damning than any shout. The elder sister stood frozen, clutching the ruined veil as if it were all she had left, her heart hammering as the family she once knew crumbled into dust before her very eyes. The father's wrist strained in the cowboy's grip, his knuckles white, his face contorted with a rage so profound it was almost inhuman. For a long, stretched moment, neither man moved. the square holding its breath as though the earth itself waited for the outcome. The father spat into the dust, his voice thick with fury. "She is my daughter. I will discipline her as I see fit." The words were a claim of ownership, ancient and absolute. The cowboy's grip tightened, unyielding, his eyes locked with a fire that did not waver. "She is no longer yours to strike," he said, and the finality in his voice sent a chill through the crowd. "She is mine to protect now." The words rolled across the onlookers like a thunderclap, silencing even the boldest jeers. He wasn't just claiming a bride, he was declaring a war. The younger sister gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized the choice had been spoken before all, sealed not with a vow but with an act of defiance. The elder sister staggered backward, the ruined veil clutched to her chest, her sobbing breath slicing the silence. Her sister was protected. Her sister was chosen. And she was nothing. Elias Red Feather. Sometimes honor is not won through vows beneath a roof, but through defiance shouted beneath the sky, and sometimes it is stolen from one to shelter another. The rival farmer, the same one who had torn the veil from her head, was always eager for spectacle. He saw his moment. He snatched the veil from the elder sister's hands, jerking it high into the air like a tattered banner of her defeat. "Look here," he shouted, his laughter raw and cruel. "This rag is all she has left, trampled, torn, worth less than a saddlecloth." He shook it before the crowd, and laughter rippled through them, bitter and mocking. This was a game now, and her humiliation was the prize. The elder sister lunged forward with a cry of pure anguish, her hand outstretched, but he was too quick. He tossed the veil to another man, who waved it above his head as if it were some trophy won at a cruel game. The younger sister cried out, "Stop, please!" her voice breaking as the veil passed from hand to hand, each touch sullying it further with dust and jeers. The cowboy's jaw hardened, his shoulders stiffening as he released the father's wrist. He pushed through the mocking men, his face a thundercloud. His fist shot out, not a wild swing, but a short, brutal jab, striking the man holding the veil square in the chest, sending him stumbling back into the crowd. Gasps erupted as the cowboy seized the veil from his grasp. Silence fell once more, broken only by the ragged breath of the elder bride. Slowly, deliberately, the cowboy crossed the square. He walked past the father, past the stunned minister, past the gawking crowd. He did not hand the veil to the younger sister he had chosen. He stopped directly in front of the elder sister, and with a touch surprisingly gentle for a man whose hands were so hard, he draped the torn, dirty cloth across her shoulders. "This was never theirs to destroy," he said quietly, but his words carried in the sudden, absolute hush. The elder sister froze, her hands trembling as they rose to clutch the veil, fresh tears welling in her eyes. For the first time since the bells rang that morning, her sobs fell silent. Not from joy, not from peace, but from a sliver of dignity briefly returned, even if it was wrapped in tatters. And the crowd, for a moment, could not laugh, for the simple, unexpected gesture of kindness silenced even their cruelest tongues. They had witnessed something they didn't understand, a twist in the story that left them speechless. For a heartbeat, the square was hushed, the tattered veil resting on the elder sister's shoulders like a crown made of ashes. But a crowd's shame is a fleeting thing. The rival farmer broke the silence with a harsh bark of laughter. "Look at her," he jeered, pointing a grimy finger. "He gives her back scraps, and she clings to them like treasure." The sound caught on other tongues, and soon a ripple of cruel laughter spread through the crowd again, chasing the silence away. Women whispered behind their fans, their eyes sharp as knives. Men smirked, muttering that no gesture could change what she was. Unwanted, unchosen, a shadow of her sister. The elder sister clutched the veil tighter, her chin trembling as tears streaked her cheeks. Every cruel word struck her like a lash, but she stood straighter, her back stiffening against the storm. She would not fall again. Not for them. Elias Redfeather. Cruelty once emboldened by a crowd strikes not with fists, but with laughter, and it leaves wounds deeper than any whip. The younger sister burst forward then, shoving against the wall of onlookers, her small frame filled with a sudden, fierce strength. "Stop it!" she cried, her voice breaking. "Please, have you no shame? She has done nothing but stand where she was told to stand, wear what she was told to wear. If you hate her, hate me instead." Her plea cracked through the square, silencing a few of the onlookers, but most only sneered, calling her a thief and a usurper. Her defense only seemed to confirm her guilt in their eyes. The father raised his voice again, his fury now burning hotter than the crowd's scorn, directed at them both. "You are both a disgrace," he bellowed, his face purple with rage. "One weak, one disobedient, and together you drag my name into the dust. Begone from me, both of you." The words struck like a hammer, and for a moment even the crowd stilled, shocked at the cruelty spoken aloud. This was no longer just a broken engagement. It was a family tearing itself to pieces in public. The elder sister staggered, the veil slipping from her shoulders. But the cowboy caught it. He held it in his hands before all, his voice ringing out, steady and clear, cutting through the venom. "This veil is not disgrace," he said, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. "It is truth. Torn, yes, but it tells more of honor than your pride ever will." He crossed the space again and lifted the veil, draping it back over the elder sister's head, his eyes locking with hers. "Dignity cannot be stolen," he said firmly, for her alone to hear. Gasps rippled through the square. What was he doing? Some whispered that he mocked the younger sister with the gesture, a cruel public reversal. Others that he meant to bind himself to both sisters, a scandal of a different kind. But the elder's tears flowed unchecked, her fingers rising to hold the lace against her cheeks, as though it were a lifeline in the storm. And though the crowd still jeered, their laughter no longer rang as sharp. For they saw, if only for an instant, that their cruelty could not strip from her what one defiant act had just returned. The veil trembled as the elder sister clutched it to her face, her sobs hidden once more beneath the torn lace. The square buzzed with an uneasy energy, the laughter faltering now that the cowboy's words lingered in the air, like smoke, refusing to disperse. He had changed the shape of the story, and they weren't sure what to make of it. The younger sister stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes shining with tears. "Enough!" she cried, her voice raw but strong. "You mock her, you call her nothing, but this was never her fault. It was never mine either." The crowd leaned in, hungry for more scandal, their whispers crackling like fire. The elder sister lowered the veil just enough to glare at her, her voice a low, vicious thing, full of rage and pain. "Not your fault. You stand at his side while I am torn apart before the town. You stole what was mine." The younger sister shook her head, her whole body trembling. "I stole nothing," she insisted, her voice rising. "This marriage was never about love. It was about land, dowry, and pride. You were promised like cattle, and I was dragged into the bargain with you. We were both betrayed." Gasps shot through the crowd, faces paling as the truth, ugly and raw, bled into the daylight. This was more than a simple broken heart. This was business. This was dirty. The father's face twisted, his fist clenching. "Silence!" he thundered. "You dare speak such filth before your own kin, before the whole town." Elias Redfeather. Truth once spoken is like water loosed from a dam. It cannot be held back, no matter how hard men claw at the flood. The younger sister lifted her chin, her voice steadier now, fueled by a righteousness born of desperation. "Yes, I dare. You bartered us like tools, cared only for your standing, never for our hearts. This shame is yours, not ours." Her words sliced through the square, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. Even the jeers stalled, replaced by the uneasy shifting of feet. She had turned the accusation back on its source. The elder sister swayed, her veil slipping back as her eyes filled with a new kind of fury, mixed with a dawning, horrifying despair. "So I was nothing more than a dowry to you," she whispered, the words directed at her father, her voice breaking. "Not a daughter, not a bride, just a coin in your hand." The father's face reddened, but the weight of the crowd pressed on him now, their stares no longer amused but sharp as blades. They were starting to look at him not as a wronged patriarch, but as a cheat. The sheriff raised his hand, his voice tense. "Disperse before blood is spilled. This is a family's shame, not the town's trial." But the family already stood in ruins, torn apart by words that could never be unsaid. The elder sister sank to her knees, the veil puddling around her, her sobs raw and uncontrolled. The younger sister turned away, her hand clutched in the cowboy's, her tears falling like rain, and the square buzzed not with laughter now, but with the heavy, uncomfortable silence of a truth that no one could bury again. The square felt colder now, though the sun still blazed overhead. The crowd no longer laughed openly, their whispers muted as if the truth had stolen their appetite for cruelty. The elder sister knelt with the ruined veil spread across her lap, her shoulders shaking with sobs she could no longer hide. The younger sister stood opposite her, the cowboy's hand wrapped firmly around hers, his stance unyielding against the press of onlookers. Their father's chest heaved as he looked between them, his pride wounded more deeply than any flesh. "You dare speak against me before this town?" he spat, his voice cracked with rage. "You defy the blood that raised you. Then hear me now." He raised his voice so every soul from the church steps to the saloon doors could hear. "You are no daughters of mine." The words dropped like stones into the silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Women covered their mouths, men shifted uneasily, for such a severing of kinship was rare and bitter as death. The younger sister's face drained of color, her lips trembling. "Father, please," she begged, taking a step toward him. But he turned his back on her, a gesture more final than any blow. He lifted his hand in dismissal. "Be gone from me, both of you." The elder sister choked on a sob, clutching the veil tighter, as if it were the last thing that tied her to the family name he had just stripped from her. Elias Red Feather. There are wounds a father's words carve that no doctor's hand can mend. They cut through flesh, through bone, straight to the soul, leaving children to bleed alone. The cowboy stepped forward, his voice low but steady, carrying in the hush. "If you cast her out, I will not," he said, his gaze on the younger sister, but his words for the whole town. "Before this town and before the Almighty, I call her mine." He lifted the younger sister's hand higher, his eyes never wavering from the crowd. "She is my wife, chosen freely. No bargain, no dowry, no deceit. Mine." A murmur spread through the onlookers. Some were shocked, some approving, others disbelieving. But no one spoke against him, for his words rang too clear, too final. A marriage declared before the town, even without a minister, held its own kind of weight. He had bound her to him, and in doing so had severed her completely from her past. The elder sister staggered to her feet, her veil clutched against her chest, her face blotched and wet with tears. Her eyes burned at the sight of their joined hands, at the declaration that had shattered her place in the world. Slowly she let the veil slip from her grasp. It fell between them, a thin, torn barrier resting on the dust, marking the line that no love, no forgiveness could ever cross again. The cowboy bent to pick it up, his hand brushing the lace, but the elder sister hissed, her voice venomous. Leave it. It was mine once, but never again. The veil lay abandoned, a symbol of bonds severed beyond repair, and the crowd, though still hungry for whispers, spoke them more softly now, for even cruelty bends before the sight of a family torn beyond mending. The veil lay in the dust, its lace shredded, its whiteness marred by mud and footprints. The elder sister stood stiff, her chest heaving, her face blotched with tears she no longer cared to hide. The crowd lingered in a restless hush, their whispers quieter now, for the cruelty had run its course and left only the bitter taste of what had been broken. The younger sister trembled, her hand still clasped in the cowboy's, her eyes darting between her father's turned back and her sister's tear-streaked face. The silence pressed heavy, unbearable, until the cowboy bent and lifted the veil one last time. The torn cloth dangled from his hands, its edges frayed, its beauty gone. He turned not to the younger sister, but to the elder, his voice low, carrying to every ear in the square. "This was never yours to bear," he said softly. "Not the shame, not the ridicule, not the burden of a bargain you never chose." He held the veil out to her, his gaze steady. "Take it back. Not as chains, but as proof you endured what none should have faced." The elder sister's hands shook as she reached out, her fingers closing around the ruined veil. Her sobs broke free again, but this time they were different. Not the hollow cries of humiliation, but the raw, guttural sound of release. Elias Red Feather. Dignity, once stripped bare, can still be stitched together from tatters, for even a torn veil can bear witness that a soul refused to vanish. Slowly she drew the veil over her head once more. Though it hung crooked, the lace torn, she stood straighter, her chin lifting. And for the first time that day she looked not broken, but unyielding. Her eyes met the crowd's, and one by one they lowered their gazes, shamed by what they had feasted upon. The younger sister sobbed, reaching a hand toward her, a gesture of peace, of apology. But the elder only shook her head. "Go," she whispered hoarsely, her voice empty of everything but exhaustion. "What's done is done. Walk your path. I will walk mine." The father stood rigid, refusing to turn, a stone monument to his own pride. But the sheriff, his face weary, muttered to the crowd, "Let it end here." The townsfolk began to drift away, their torches dimming, their whispers trailing off into silence. The show was over. The cowboy wrapped his arm around the younger sister, guiding her away, his vow already spoken in the square. The elder sister remained, clutching the veil close, its tatters fluttering in the evening wind. And though her tears still fell, they no longer shamed her. They were simply tears. And just when you think the story is over, a new truth finds the light. You see, the cowboy's choice wasn't just about love. It was about something much older and much darker. He had a history with that family, a history the father thought was long buried. Years ago, that same father had orchestrated a land deal, a bargain that had ruined another family, forcing them off their ancestral lands, leaving them with nothing. That ruined family was the cowboy's. He hadn't come for a bride. He'd come for justice. Choosing the younger sister, the one not officially part of the contract, was a calculated move. It voided the entire agreement, exposing the father's fraudulent dealings for all to see. He used the father's greed against him, turning the wedding into a public tribunal. The humiliation of the elder sister was a casualty, a cruel but necessary part of a plan years in the making. He hadn't just saved the younger sister, he had avenged his own past. And as the crowd dispersed, the sheriff didn't just walk away. He walked over to the father, who still stood with his back to his abandoned daughters. "I think you and I need to have a talk about that old land title," the sheriff said, his voice quiet but cold as a grave. "Seems some new information has come to light." The father finally turned, his face not angry anymore, but pale with a new kind of fear. The cowboy's plan had worked perfectly. The shame he'd inflicted on the sisters was now recoiling back onto him tenfold. Elias Redfeather. Justice is a patient hunter. It can wait a lifetime hiding in the shadows until the perfect moment to strike. The elder sister, still standing alone in the square, overheard the sheriff's words. She looked from her father's terrified face to the back of the cowboy, now disappearing down the dusty street with her sister. And in that moment, she understood. The cruelty, the public spectacle, the torn veil. It wasn't just about a broken heart. It was an execution, the execution of her family's name. And as the last of the sun bled from the sky, she slowly, deliberately, took off the tattered veil. She folded it, not with anger, but with a strange, cold calm. She was no longer a bride, no longer a daughter. She was something else now, a survivor, and her story was far from over. I am Elias Redfeather, and I tell it as it was. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more tales that have been left behind. Now let me ask you, standing in that dusty square, seeing all the lies unravel, do you think the cowboy's justice was worth the price the sisters had to pay? Let us know in the comments below.